Hey everybody, welcome to Workforce Gaming. I am Brad, here with Doug.
Hey.
Doug recently got a 3DS because it's 2022, and realized that we kind of had both of us actually had some big blind spots in like the DS portable Nintendo area. So you went through and bought a bunch of 3DS games. So this might turn into the We Play 3DS Games channel for a minute.
Yeah, we're now like a retro podcast. Oh man, I just found out recently like the Wii is actually legitimately retro. It's the same distance away from like when we were kids playing the Super Nintendo as it is like the Wii to the Super Nintendo. It's not fun. The 3DS might actually be really retro, which is really scary.
Every now and then I think about that with something like, I'm like, oh, I should go back and play this game for like the 360 or something. Like that game's like 15 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, so the one we want to focus on here is A Link Between Worlds.
Yes. Legend
of Zelda, connection to A Link to the Past. One of the Zelda games that has a very direct link there. It is a pretty direct link, right? I don't really know much about it.
It's a sequel. It's actually a sequel to it. So, which is great because I never played that one. And so whenever I make any comparisons, it's going to be to Ocarina, which I did finish. And people are like, wait, it's like, yeah.
Ocarina is the only Zelda you finished?
Yes.
Okay, yes. So, okay. Anyway, so continue with your talking about this franchise of like 30 games that you have played one of.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, I picked up A Link Between Worlds. I did not like A Link to the Past. I tried playing it a few times, and it was just kind of ugly and boring to me. And
that's not going to go over well.
Well, no, I mean, okay, well, even comparatively, if you think of something like the other top-down ones that like looked really cool to me that I just never played, it was like Four Swords, like that looks awesome. The Oracle of Ages, like those look cool. The Game Boy one looks cool. The Link to the Past when I was just playing, I was just like, it wasn't really my thing. So that's why I was like really kind of like, okay, well, Link Between Worlds I know is a direct sequel, so I'm kind of like low expectations. I got a 3DS. I just heard it's like a really good game. And this just completely blew me out of the water. I absolutely love this game. It was so good. And I think a lot of it to me was just playing on my expectations of Ocarina and kind of expecting not to like it. And it's like, oh, actually, maybe I do like these top-down Zelda games.
So what was the hook? Like what got you into this one? Where was that thing that you're like, yep, okay, I'm in, versus the other top-down ones?
I think this one has a lot more personality than just a lot of other games I played. So again, I really only played Ocarina, so I can only speak to that one. But there's just a lot of personality within each individual characters. The story kind of had an interesting hook. It basically sets up it's basically kind of the same similar as most of these, where it's like with Ocarina of Time and the other ones where you kind of travel around a bit. You're doing kind of these little side quests, and all of a sudden the castle attacks, and then everything changes. Yep. The castle is attacked, and everything changes. The thing I really liked about this one is the character's really fun. One of the kind of the fun hooks is that there's a guy who just kind of bums around your house, and he's not very nice, and it was just kind of like a funny idea of like, I'm going off on my adventure and there's this bum living in my house. So every time I return home, it's not like I'm returning to my parents or returning to whoever. I'm returning to this guy who's just like slinking around my house.
Crashing on your couch, eating your Cheetos.
Yes, exactly. It has a very crashy on your couch attitude. And I'll explain kind of like the major mechanic with that one. But the thing that's kind of fun, I think the big mechanic that did kind of kick everything off is this thing called the Dark World. I think this is also in A Link to the Past, but as part of the series, there's a good world and a dark world. I would say Ocarina of Time is kind of similar, where it's like, okay, this is the present, and then this is the future, and the future is bad. How this one plays with it, it's actually something in the past changed, so it's like a different timeline. So you're going to like a totally different timeline, same years in the future, same period of time that but just like a different timeline, so you're kind of going to like an alternate dimension. And the alternate dimension stuff was really, really fun, because you get to meet all these fun quirky characters and you get to meet their evil versions.
Oh, is it like straight up like, I have a mustache now, I'm mean?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. like the town is like, so like the town you visit, instead of just being like, oh, it's the fun town with all these places, like it's a town of thieves and everybody's a thief. So it's kind of fun seeing like those good evil versions. And the mechanic that is really fun is that you swap between the worlds pretty frequently. And I just thought that mechanic was really, really well done. Again, going back to Ocarina of Time, the big issue it's not even an issue I had with Ocarina of Time, but in order to go from the past to the future, you had to go to this one location.
Yep.
And then when you're to that one location, you could then swap to the future, swap to the past, and you come out, and it was kind of a hassle getting to at any point in time. But in this one, there's areas all over the place where you can go between the light world and the dark world. So you're always swapping between the two. So it's like in this world, there's a pathway I can take to go across, but if I go in the other world, it's not there. So it does a lot of fun stuff with just like the overworld of like trying to figure out your way around the overworld as you're going between these two dimensions. Yeah. And you're also meeting this huge cast of characters as a result, because there's essentially twice the amount of characters. And I just really loved that hook because it was just really fun exploring. The mechanics were really, really nice and smooth. I think there was just something with the top-down thing that just made it feel really easy to open and close. I feel like with like Ocarina, it's like I'm going on a grand adventure. And on this one, it's like I could do a few minutes of that and just kind of close it and then open again. It kind of reminded me of in the 90s, everybody likes to talk about Polly Pocket, but there's this other thing that was basically the guy version of Polly Pocket called Mad Max. Do you know no, not Mad Max, Mighty Max. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
No frame of reference.
Oh, okay. Maybe we'll just delete this part. But it's a little toy that you opened up and you had this little diorama with like these like little figures running around. So it felt like I was opening a little diorama that I was just like kind of peeking into this like little world, and I would just close my little diorama when I was done. And I really, really liked that aspect of it.
Interesting.
A lot. So it just I guess that was kind of like all the hooks, and I was just like, oh, this actually is pretty neat.
Mm-hmm. So with that just open and close thing, because I think that's the problem. I tried to play Ocarina of Time a little bit on the Switch, and I kept going like, this isn't a good stopping point. This isn't a good stopping point. This isn't a good stopping point. I think that portable nature is a big hook with something like this. That going back and forth between light and dark worlds, does that play into dungeons at all, or?
It doesn't.
Not spoilery, I guess, because I guess I could.
Yeah, I would say it doesn't play a lot into dungeons specifically, but it does getting to dungeons. You might play fully, like when you do the your first mission is very similar to Ocarina of Time, like go get 3 things across the region. So you explore the light region for a few hours before you get to the dark one. So you'll play like a light version of that dungeon and then a dark version of that dungeon, which is just completely different mechanically. But I'd say like that swapping between them only occurs in the overworld. It doesn't really occur within the dungeon itself until like I think near the end there's like a little bit of that, but not so much. Which I was thinking like in hindsight, I think it's actually pretty good because it kind of keeps that mechanic just in the overworld. So there's never like, well, should I actually go back and forth between it? I just like that it was kind of kept, it was kind of like cordoned off in just the overworld. I can see like why you would think like, oh, well, it actually might be nice to do that in some of the dungeons. But the dungeons had such unique and interesting puzzles in and of themselves that they didn't need an additional layer of complexity. Yeah. I will say one of the interesting points you were thinking about earlier, where you're saying there's not a good stopping point with Ocarina. I felt like this was the first portable game I've played in a long time. There's a lot of games that are now Switch is portable, but I feel like Switch doesn't have portable games on it. It has console games on it, but like a portable game is built for you to play a few minutes at the time. So when you do a dungeon, it's about 15 minutes. Halfway through, exactly 50% of the way through every dungeon, there's a warp back to the save at the beginning. So you can spend, 7.5 minutes playing a dungeon, and then you did the half a dungeon, then you do the next half of the dungeon. So it's really great in that way. I'd say the one thing that I didn't like because of that, it felt less of an adventure than Ocarina. It felt less of an action adventure game. It felt more of a puzzle game, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
Because it's so mechanics heavy that you don't feel like you're going like you can see the grid. You can see the you can see the tricks. Actually, I did forget to mention one of the biggest mechanics of the game is I don't know how to describe it. And maybe it's just kind of a neat thing to watch in trailers. It's just, I guess, kind of in the whole gamut of different mechanics, it doesn't really matter too much. It's this cool thing where you stick to a wall. So if you're walking near any wall, you press a button and you just stick to it, and then you become like a painting on that wall that you can move back and forth between. Yeah, so it's like really cool. So I'll give you a good example. During a boss fight, a boss might be doing some crazy attack and like stomping all over the place. You just have to go on the wall and just kind of wait for him to finish his attack. Or let's say there's a gap that's too big. It's like, well, I can stick to the wall and then kind of move around. I'd say just like talking about it as a mechanic individually doesn't sound super interesting, but it's really, really neat on the 3DS because you have this top-down view, and then once it changes to two, once you like stick to a wall, it, like the camera swoops down into your like little world, and you see him moving along the wall. That's like a much, much closer camera, and it just looks gorgeous when they do it. It's just kind of a fun little swapping between the 3D and the 2D. Looks really cool on a console that's based on 3D,
yeah.
Stuff. Yeah.
So with that in mind, then is it more? It's more geared toward puzzles more so than combat.
Yeah.
You haven't mentioned combat. I mean, but I don't. At all. Like,
I mean, there is combat, but it's like it's very simple. Just kind of like you tap your sword. It's like the exact.
You swing it in front of you, and you hit the thing once or twice.
Yeah, and I'd say like there's like some big boss moments that are kind of fun, but I'd say like the bosses are very, very puzzle centric. That it's like you just hit it when he's stunned. The thing is like, okay, how do I get him to a stun state?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying like it feels much more mechanical in that way. It feels more puzzle like, and overall it feels like less of an adventure. One of the other cool things that they do that I thought was really neat is like, so in Zelda games, you get your, like as you're going linearly through the story, you get your different, items. So like, okay, I got my hook shot, and then I got my boomerang, and then I got my
and you use that to solve your dungeon puzzles. You use that to stun your boss. You use that to
yeah, exactly. So there's an interesting mechanic in here that I'm not going to get too detailed into, where that guy who bums around your house actually rents equipment to you. So you never actually earn a hook shot. He'll rent you a hook shot, and then when you die, it gets returned back to him. He'll rent you a boomerang. But the thing that's kind of neat about that rental system is that you can go to any dungeon you want. And like once you get to that dungeon, you're like, okay, there's even like a little signpost thing. They'll have like a boomerang on it. You're like, okay, I'll just warp back to that guy and then rent the boomerang just for that. And then, so I don't really, because if you think about like in Zelda stuff, in most Zelda games, you don't really need an item outside of like one dungeon, maybe two. I guess yes. for final dungeons it gets a little crazy, but for most dungeons it's like we're just gonna do this one mechanic.
Yes.
We're gonna do yes, we're just gonna do this like one mechanic. So they basically took that. He's like, well, if we're only doing it for one mechanic per dungeon, then like why do you need to go on any sort of like linearity to pick up these different items? Let's just say go anywhere. Which is neat. I think that was kind of the idea they were going for. I think the rental system's a little weird because it does cost a lot of in-game money to rent something. And you can rent, and like what I would do is like I would rent all the equipment. I just rent everything at once. So like any dungeon I came upon, I knew I'd have the right thing. But then when you die, it all gets returned and you have to like rebuy it. And the guy's a real jerk about it.
I just don't want you to be condescending to me. And,
yeah.
So
yeah.
Does that affect the story at all and like the meaning behind dungeons? So I guess in my mind it's normally like, okay, I'm going to this dungeon to get this particular thing, or I'm going to the dungeon to accomplish this task. Does the story feel more like open-ended and loose then, where it's just like, go collect your 7 things from the 7 varieties of dungeons?
It is literally the exact same thing as Ocarina, where you have to get the 7 sages, and each 7 sages is a different dungeon. So you can do like get the sages whatever order you want. Doesn't really matter. So yeah, I'd say that I'd say in that case, like the story is like pretty loose. Like you collect 3 things, they introduce the Dark World, then you collect 7 more things. I will say though, the ending of this game is probably one of my favorite video game endings ever.
Really? Interesting.
It totally came out of nowhere. They pulled some neat little tricks that I like wasn't expecting. And it just had one of my favorite endings to a game ever. And I think the thing that was even more the thing that made it more surprising is that I don't expect a lot of the story in Zelda. So when it had this very cool, elaborate ending that had some really interesting character moments with Link and Zelda, it's like I don't really, they're more like archetypes than characters. So seeing these like really cool character moments was really, really neat. And overall, I think it was just amazing. I don't know if I liked it. I think the only reason I didn't like it as much as Ocarina was again that it didn't have that big adventure scope. But I think it was like, I think this is like one of those things like I can see where it's like, oh, I see why people like Nintendo games.
I guess
I just never a fan of them.
That you don't like Nintendo. I think that would have been.
It's not that I don't like Nintendo. I just they release very good games and mostly middling games. And then playing the very good games every once in a while, like, oh, these are actually pretty good.
That's why people are excited about this. Cool. Well, we are we are Workforce Gaming. You can follow us on Twitter, Workforce Gaming. Subscribe to us wherever you're listening, and we will see you later.
Bye.